Happy Saturday, everybody. This is your old pal, Uncle Hondo, your Las Vegas Raiders beat writer on SI and the host of the Las Vegas Raiders Insider podcast, along with my very dear friend, a very highly decorated journalist, a tremendously successful attorney in the Atlanta Buckhead area of Georgia, who for nearly 2 decades joins me each and every week. We go around the game of football, we talk about it, we dice it up, we cut it up. He is the one and only, the great Jonathan Shop. Johnny, before we get started, tell everybody where they find you on the old interwebs at social media.
Still doing it at X, at JP Spartan. And folks, we're not going to waste your time. A lot of times we see some things, they're not talked about on the broadcast, they're not talked about here. That's what the best stuff is out there on Twitter. I'm trying to do it. I love hearing what people have to say and what they see as well, because a lot of times we see things that are not discussed in public.
Right. And you've been interacting with Raider fans.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them.
I know.
From Northern California to Oregon to Texas, they're all over the place. That's the thing I notice about this Raider Nation. They are in it. They want to know what's going on.
You interacted with one of them recently, and I get this email. It was so great. I heard from John, and I thought that was kind of cool.
It's always fun to hear from you. I think that's the best thing about it, even in the off season, because we know there's going to be some busy days coming that people are going to have some thoughts. Part of the most fun of paying attention, being a super fan, following it religiously when you're talking about college football or pro football is what could happen next? What do I think is going to work? What it won't work? Sometimes people are like, hey, this is crazy. It's not going to work. And sometimes they think, oh, this is going to work. And here's why. And we all end up learning more, and it just keeps it fun. This is supposed to be fun, for God's sake. And it is still a lot of fun on Twitter.
John, we're going to start with a subject that in all of the years we've done it, I've had lots of people ask me to have you comment on stuff. Never to the voluminous amounts that I got this week. I mean, I had people in the organization ask me to get you to comment on this. Fans. So let's get right to it. Years ago, Richie Incognito was accused of bullying a teammate. There were some allegations of racial, all of that stuff. Now, Richie Incognito is one of the toughest, meanest. I mean, he is just, this is a guy that would play in a leather helmet. He's the guy, I tell people all the time, when you're raised in Michigan, he is Dennis Rodman or Rick Mahorn or Bill Laimbeer. You hate them when they're on your opponent's team. You love them when you're on yours. As Spartans, we know exactly about Richie Incognito, but we digress. I have never had a bad dealing with him. I don't know one person who knows him who does not like him. And it cost him a ton of money. Eventually, he was able to recover part of his career in the Raiders with John Gruden, ironically, and really has been a statesman of the game. This week, the player who he was accused of doing that with came out and said it was not truthful. What his parents had been spreading, that it never happened. He was I use the term repentive, but it completely exonerated and cleared Richie Incognito. There were some in the media who absolutely went after him with reckless abandon, who, in my opinion, we're not going to name them, they did nothing to try to get Richie's side. It was, you're guilty, bad human, yada, yada, yada. I remember writing good things about Richie Incognito, and people would say, yeah, but he's a racist or whatever. And I'm thinking, okay, whatever. The point is, it cost him dearly. Now all of a sudden you're watching those media say nothing, or in one case actually acting arrogant, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. Here's my question to you. Fans want to know, people that love Richie want to know, does Richie have recourse here against the family? Does he have recourse against the organization? the National Football League. Let me read you one email. Okay, just one. Dear Mr. Carpenter, this person's from Sacramento. I am a man of color. I had strong opinions about Richie Incognito. And when he got hired to be a Raider, I was very disappointed in my team because of his past. As his time went on, people embraced him, liked him, respected him. And I began to soften my position. Now I feel completely lied to. I'm curious. And this is what I thought was pretty good. There have been lawsuits against the NFL for racism by a previous quarterback that even though it really wasn't proven, there were settlements. Does Richie have a case against the NFL? Basically, people want to know is when people are allowed to destroy his life, there's no recourse. What are your thoughts? You're the attorney. I'm asking you, put on your attorney hat.
Yeah, it's tricky. So what you're talking about is, does Richie Incognito have a civil action against anybody or any organization? And if so, what are the prospects? The simple answer is you can pretty much sue anybody at any time for anything. That doesn't mean too much about what you're actually going to collect. In this case, Richie Incognito would probably need to get some advice and consider what he may be able to collect from and what are the prospects of collecting. This is a super dicey area. It involves the First Amendment a little bit. It involves private speech, which is not terribly protected, and it involves a difficulty in assessing damages. One of the key factors to look for when it's making a call, whether to file suit against anybody or not, is how much could he prove he was damaged by this? So we're talking about loss of endorsements, loss of contracts. Some of that stuff is very clear. Some of it is very, very gray and difficult to prove. So off the top of my head, I'm not sure, based on what I know and what I can remember, that it would be worth pursuing. But it could get very interesting. What happens a lot of times is, and almost all the time, is there's not a lot of like insurance coverage for this kind of stuff. There's not a car insurance policy or a homeowner's insurance policy that's going to bail you out if you libel or slander somebody, if you defame them. But defamation is inherently difficult to prove. So Incognito would have to prove that somebody did defame him, which is more difficult when you're a public figure, just to begin with, and that he was damaged, and then proving his damages. You would be talking about a pretty complex and technical litigation. It's not going to really be simple or clear. It's not really going to be black or white. It's not really going to be red, green, or blue where you can really see the difference. And the question would be, what organizations might he consider taking on? I don't think, based on what I remember, he would consider taking on Fox, because I remember some of Jay Glazer's reporting was more along the lines with what we learned this week about, hey, maybe that wasn't exactly what it was presented to be. Some of the other folks at ESPN and elsewhere, they may have more of an issue. And you also get into a problem. The further you get from this thing happening, the more difficult it probably is to prove, the more difficult the whole thing is. We're talking about almost a decade now. So this will be interesting to watch. It's going to take some real digging and analysis. It's going to take some strategy, but this may be one where, you know, somebody goes way back into the metadata and into the old emails to see what is still left. It's a troubling thing because there was damage done to a guy who appears to have matured over the time. I remember seeing him on the Raiders Hard Knocks thinking, this looks like a pretty different guy than we've seen. Although tough and hard-nosed, if you were that obnoxious and that intolerable, you would be out of the sport. And that's really not what happened. So this is a wild turn to hear. And this is also, Mr. Martin probably has done some damage to himself and to the rest of his life and the rest of his career. He doesn't come off as a very trustworthy guy, to be honest with you, at all. If this is all going on and being reported and it was false, it's really hard to understand why he wouldn't say, hey, that's not actually what happened. So this is wild. There's going to need to be some work done to figure out who Richie Incognito possibly could sue, whether it would be worth it, whether he could prove they defamed him, and what kind of damages he could present. None of this is very simple or easy. I would say it's probably 33 to 40% likely that he would file suit against anybody. There may be more than a few attorneys that would like to take a look at it. They'd like to get it. They'd like to get into what's called discovery to see what kind of documents and information they can get and what kind of evidence they can get out of that. So this will be something to watch. I hope this is a little bit of an earthquake as far as reporting goes and as far as how much is enough to report it. And are we covering our bases? Did we ask for another side? I don't want both sides in reporting. I want to get the accurate truth. And sometimes if you can't get the accurate truth, if you can't get it on the record, you shouldn't say anything. This is a long time ago. I know a lot of folks out there don't remember this. They may learn a lot more about it in the weeks and months to come. This is a bombshell that was dropped, and it brings in a lot of questions, including, like you said, and I wish I had a straight answer. It's a really straight answer. Defamation, libel, slander. This is not simple stuff. Very difficult to prove, but you've got to prove damages. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
Moving on, more Raiders. The Raiders should face similar teams when navigating the free agency rush. Let's talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, when you think about it, who's got the money out there to spend? They're going to run into some of the same teams on a regular basis. We're talking about the Patriots. I know there's some Ravens guys that are up. There's some Commanders folks. There's teams that have money and teams that have needs. I think one thing to keep in mind as this thing gets ready to go for the Raider fans is, who are you going up against? If you really want to break it down, what are this team's needs that have a lot of money? Where might they go? And let's say the Patriots go out and sign somebody right away. How does that reframe what's going to happen inside the Raiders building? It's interesting because you're so locked in on your team. Hey, this is what we need. I like this guy. How about this free agent? In this case, I think you got to keep a wider view, because what you're going to run into is some of the same teams are going to be competing for the same free agents pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And every time they make a move, it might affect what the Raiders do as well. Since we've got a brand new organization here, this is going to be really interesting to watch. But I would say, hey, looking from an outside perspective, folks, take a look at who is making moves in the free agency and how that might affect the Raiders, because they're going to end up competing with some of those same teams like the Patriots, maybe the Commanders, the Titans here and there. They're going to compete with some of those same teams for these free agents. I don't remember that necessarily happening too much in the past, but it's going to be an interesting wrinkle to this free agency season that's, a number of weeks away now.
Omar Little on The Wire was famous for saying, money ain't got no owners, only spenders. And your thoughts as they head into free agency?
What a show. What a character. Only got spenders. So who's going to spend? Now, we're hearing some news that maybe franchise tags are coming. I think franchise tags are smart. For Cincinnati, I think it makes sense. I actually think it makes sense for Minnesota as well when you're talking about Sam Darnold. But when you're looking at what teams have to spend, maybe what money is out there to spend, I think it's important to consider, can this guy be franchised? And if so, what does that do to our free agency perspective? There's teams, including the Chiefs and the Eagles, that have to make decisions. There's decisions that the Raiders have to make. But when you're looking at the top of the sport, I think with the wide receivers in Cincinnati and, of course, with Sam Darnold, let's see what is done there. Because this stuff, the salary cap, you've got some teams that are already over by a lot. You've got some teams that are really going to be constricted in what they can do because of their cap space. Everybody wants to see what's going to happen here in Atlanta. I think people are interested to see what happens with I hate to say Aaron Rodgers in a different way, but man, as this free agency season starts, it's important probably to evaluate where you are money-wise, where everyone else is in your division money-wise. I know that's already been talked about in this great team that you've got, of course, Insider Podcast and with Sports Illustrated, and I'm sure more of that is going to be coming as we get to that time when the free agency dollars start to tick. It's not just as simple as many folks know. It's not just as simple as, oh, I like this player and that player. It's like every single move is going to affect something else. And as the Raiders try to get back in the mix in their division, it's going to be really interesting to see what they do with this money. I don't know that we know at all what they're going to do. And I'm not sure that they know exactly what they're going to do, but I'm sure that each move affects, like, okay, our scenarios go here to here. It's like a decision tree going down, 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 and around. Just keep an eye on the money and keep an eye on the teams that are really stuck. I know Seattle has some issues, for example, some big cap issues they got to solve.
Yep, I agree. And I think that could work out well for the Raiders because there's going to be some guys that Pete Carroll knows well. Let's talk about things to keep in mind on the NFL draft. I think this is an important one to look at.
Cam Ward, what are you doing, man? No. What are you doing? No. The idea that I'm going to keep a list and check it twice and I'm going to stick it to those teams, that's a great idea to keep in your head. Saying that publicly does you no good at all. Zero good. All it does is open up the downside. You want to be a quarterback successful in the NFL, you got to learn to manage the downside. I don't know why Cam Ward said he's going to remember the teams that don't draft him. He ought to be introduced to some history with a guy named Josh Rosen. I'm not picking on Rosen. He came out of school too early, number one, and he wasn't very good. Number two, he ran his mouth. Bad idea. It's very unlikely that we're going to live long enough to see that ever be a good idea. Oh, but there's Tom Brady. Oh, but there's Rodgers. Okay. How many guys go the other way? This is where you need a good agent, you need good coaches, and you need to be a coachable player. There's no upside in saying something like this. Hopefully he doesn't repeat it again or tries to erase it. Not going to help him. Some teams and organizations are going to see that as kind of a maturity red flag, and they probably should. It amazes me, but it shouldn't, because these kids, they come up, they're the same age every year. We get a year older. Everybody out there gets hopefully a year wiser. We realize this is a bad idea. Cam Ward doesn't. I think he stuck his foot in it by saying he's going to remember any teams that don't draft him. I see no upside in doing that, and I see a maturity red flag. Everybody's got flags. Nobody's perfect. I got concerns with Sanders' size, for example. Now we've got concerns with Ward's maybe maturity. There's just no good reason or good outcome to saying something like that. It's just not very wise. Hopefully others learn from it and will keep that in here rather than out there.
Let's talk about the Sanders draft rumors.
Well, here's the thing. Folks, we never see anything like this. You got a Hall of Fame player, arguably the best cover corner in the history of the sport, if not the best corner. Very, very long media career, long documentary career, fantastic coaching career. Any single rumor or word you hear about Shedeur Sanders, I think you need to throw right out. Because if they want to, Team Sanders can swirl this thing around 360 degrees. He knows how to play it. Deion knows how to play all this stuff. He knows how to play plant stories, plant news, plant obfuscation, smoke screens. What I'm saying is, I would say don't listen to any of it. Just listen to the draft, because you could hear so many things about he's going here, he's not going there, and it's going to start crisscrossing itself and go 360 degrees, because I don't think Deion wants anybody to know what's actually going on. So I got extra antenna up for all the Sanders rumor that we hear. Throw it right out the window. This is a one of one. We do not have a parent or a influencer, an administrator, anything like it here. We don't have anybody like Deion Sanders' son that's ever been considered, as far as I can remember, at the top of the draft. No way. So any of that noise, just throw it right out. I don't think you can put anything into it.
John, I'm going to say this to you. I don't understand the Deion Sanders hate. And I want, hear me out for a minute. Okay. I've had exposure to Deion outside of football. I really like him. I understand people get tired of what is perceived drama. I get that. Okay. I understand people are tired of all the attention that he gets and certainly appears to seek. I get all that. But it's just like people that, and myself included, I'm so tired of hearing about Travis and Taylor Swift. But the point is, people consume it. It's like someone saying, I hate pizza. Okay, then why is pizza sold, more pizza sold in America? I mean, people consume it. So obviously, a lot of people are tired about it, but a lot of people aren't. I get it. I understand what it is. I don't have a problem with it. But people love or hate Sanders family. There is no middle ground.
No, I think a lot of it starts with extraordinary jealousy. Who would not like to be as outstanding at one sport, let alone two, and have the career and all this stuff? There's always been remarkable jealousy with
Yeah,
Deion.
good point.
Secondarily, you got to remember this foundationally because this comes from my neck of the woods. He played for some teams that people don't like because they win a lot and they hate. So he was a Cowboy. Doesn't matter. He came to Washington. People still didn't like him because he was a Cowboy. He was a 49er. So it's an enormous amount of jealousy. And at the same time, along the lines a little bit of Richie Incognito, you see a tremendous story of maturity, which sounds silly to say because I know he's older than me. When you saw the 60 Minutes piece, when you've seen what's happened to his foot, you got to say, well, wow, that's a real man. And then to be honest with you, he's probably proven to be a much better coach in terms of strategy, game management, and that kind of stuff so far than people would have ever guessed. They're like, oh, that's nice. He's got that high school program. Well, it got a little rocky. Some people got upset with how he was coaching here and there. Oh, forget it. And then here comes the next step. And then all of a sudden you're winning at Colorado. And now the next thing will be, can he win, without superstar players at Colorado? And does he one day go to the NFL? So when you're talking about Deion, I always consider there's some jealousy that baked in. And there's also people just don't like the teams that he played for, and partially because they won quite a bit.
All right. I want to turn to Myles Garrett. Comes out and says, listen, I want to be traded. I'm going to say this. I don't know this because you and I don't pre-discuss what our topics. I have no issue with this. I think you might. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm going to tell you why I don't have an issue with it. For so long, I understand these guys sign contracts. I also understand that NFL teams cut guys too. So to me, it's just part of the business. I don't have to like it. I don't have to dislike it, but I don't really have a problem with it because it's the system they've collectively bargained. And I'll give you a quick scenario. My buddy was dating a girl, and she was a very successful business lady, and she lived her life regimentally. I mean, she was an editor for a major newspaper. She did all of her meals. She had these Tupperware things with 6 different holders, and all of her meals, she did them on Sunday, lunch and dinner for every day up until the next Sunday. And we're like, man, she's really regimented. You sure you're going to fit into that? Because he was not a regimented man. Oh, it's great. Well, they get married, and 5 years down the road, oh my God, I can't handle this anymore. She's got all my clothes laid out for the week. They're all ironed, whatever. And I looked at her and go, I don't feel sorry for you. You knew when you married her. So my point is, this is what these people have all brought together. So I don't like it for that scenario. Tell me where I'm wrong, John.
I don't think that you're wrong. I think you've nailed the biggest point is this is what was bargained for. So those of us that come from way back in the days when teams were drafted, free agency barely existed, plan B free agency, you've got a developmental organization, all that kind of stuff. That's all fine. But as I've noticed, and we've talked about in recent years, this is moving more towards like a professional soccer or a 1 year at a time league. So in reality, is your contract in the NFL a dollar better than what is guaranteed? I don't think so. So if the Browns don't like Myles Garrett demanding this trade, and I think I don't like this as a trend because I like the continuity and the team aspect of professional football more than anything. And it's just getting harder and harder to do that. And maybe that's something that needs to be considered in the next collective bargaining. But Garrett's like, hey, I want to win. I want to get out of here. And like you said, this is kind of what they have set up. So if it feels like it's almost a 1 year at a time league, and to me, it feels like a 1 or 2 year at a time league right now, that's on everybody, including the players. So you may be more right here. I initially didn't like this, but this kind of is what it is. And I'm not so sure that Garrett is doing anything wrong. But I do still think he has just decreased his trade value. Definitely. Oh, yeah. So he's kind of sticking it to the Browns on the way out. And I wonder if somebody's going to see this and say, you know what? I want to get out of X city. But rather than go out like Myles or sit down for an interview or leak, or just blast it out on Twitter. I'm going to work this whole thing behind the scenes to try to incentivize the organization that I'm with to trade my butt, to get me out of here. Because if I'm doing better by them, maybe I get out and I get a better situation. What Garrett's just done, correct me if I'm wrong, is decrease his trade value probably by a round or two relative to draft picks. He may make it more difficult for him to get out of town before sometime in the latter part of next fall. I am concerned that this is a trend. I don't think it's a positive trend for the sport, but the biggest point I think you have made is correct. This is what was bargained for, and now the owners and the players, they got to have to deal with it.
So this brings us to another, I guess, if you're a fan of 31 teams not called the Browns, I think you're looking for guys that say, I just want to win. And if you're a fan of the Browns, I think you're like, hey, we just want to win too. He's exposing our team as a bunch of losers. I don't think he's gonna. I don't think he's gonna find a whole lot of sympathy outside of the Browns, or I don't
No,
think he's gonna find the Browns are gonna find sympathy outside of their own organization. Listen, on this podcast, we have talked for months, over probably a couple of years, on gambling. And a big warning came from afar before the big game. Let's talk about this, because you and I have kept this right in the crosshairs.
Yeah, the timing, I think major gambling stories just having a break before the Super Bowl. The timing of it, I wonder if it was all intentional. You have a major, successful, arguably one of the best umpires in Major League Baseball booted out of the game for at least 2 years because of a shared gambling account, even though it didn't gamble on baseball. Baseball, listen, that commissioner is a whole other show. That sport is in trouble. They got competition issues. They should learn a lot from the NFL. On the other side, I wonder how much the NFL would learn and do if they're in the same situation. Massive, massive, massive disciplinary action on an umpire named Hoberg because of the failure to uphold the integrity of the game by sharing sports betting accounts with a professional poker player and friend who bet on baseball. So this is unbelievable, right? Out of the sport, one of the best of all the umpires. Same time, Terry Rozier, guard for the Miami Heat, under federal investigation for possibly manipulating his performance in a 2023 NBA game. This is a fire alarm. And I think more people have had problems in the NBA than any pro sport so far. Just haven't heard as much about them. But they threw a guy out of the sport, right? Now we got another one. Now, this is on the heels of the death of Faye Vincent, who is going to be famous for arguably the most successful suspension in major pro sports history. For anybody that didn't get it with Pete Rose, here's what it was. Pete Rose wanted more than anything to be in the Hall of Fame. The punishment for his gambling was that he would never live to see himself get inducted to the Hall of Fame. For some reason, not everybody got that. They should get it now. It worked. Before Faye Vincent just recently died, he reminded people in kind of a final interview, gambling always leads to corruption. Corruption always leads to problems that are very difficult to fix. And when you are trying to fix them in the heat of the white light and the stress and the pressure, you are likely to pay a very big price in terms of delay and an overstatement or an over-administration of absurd redress or punishment. So if there were one piece of advice I'd give to anybody reading your piece, it's please do not think that the clock is not ticking on a problem. It is. Let's take a step back and look. Umpire out of the sport. NBA with gambling issues and presently gambling issues. What Vincent's trying to say, without a doubt, is NFL, you think you're doing enough to keep an eye on gambling? You probably need to do more than you think, and you better have a plan for what to do when it hits the fan, because it will hit the fan. An amazing week of gambling stories kind of around the Super Bowl, which is beyond the biggest gambling event in America each year. It's an interesting time. Quite a message from a guy that knows a whole lot about administering and dealing with gambling issues. Let's see how that quote plays out between now and, say, 2030. Something probably going to happen.
John, last thing I want to talk to you about, but I think it's important. I can't let you get out of here because we've talked about it a lot. We've talked about NFL technology. there should be a computer chip in a ball to be able to, you don't need flag guys anymore. I'm talking about, the guys on the side of the line. And it's finally coming. Let's take a victory lap here. Talk about it real quick.
Let's take a victory lap. Everybody out there patting themselves on the back too, because I know you're thinking about it too. We've talked about NFL technology. We got a peak. We saw the new headsets, CES, and then we heard Goodell talking about it before the Super Bowl. I do think technology will exist sometime in the future. We're continuing with our partners to discuss how to advance that as quickly as possible so we can get to that place. Yes. And as you know out there, and we talked about that spring league, man, that's where to watch it. Let's see what the spring league is doing. And you can expect that a lot of it is going to be applied. Next year is the year enough technology comes to the NFL to solidify the officiating and administration of the game where it is needed. You can argue that it's a little bit late. I was very excited to hear him say that it's coming, and I'm excited to watch the UFL to see what Dean Blandino and the other folks have teed up and ready to test for the NFL. We are going to turn a corner on technology.
I agree. All right, John, again, tell them where to find you on social media.
I got one more thing.
Oh,
don't forget, I'm Johnny Guitars at JP Spartan.
I love it. The great Johnny Guitars. We'll see you next Saturday, John. Thanks for joining me, brother.